The morning fog hadn't lifted yet when Dottie found the man. She almost missed him. She almost always missed things that weren't aluminum cans or cardboard boxes. Those were the things that mattered, the things that added up to something by the end of the week. But something made her stop at the mouth of the alley behind Crawford Street. The same alley she cut through every Tuesday and Friday on her way to the recycling center on Maple. Something didn't sound right. A sound, low and wet, like a dog trying to breathe underwater. Dottie was 11 years old and small for her age. Her jacket was 2 sizes too big and had a broken zipper she'd fixed with a safety pin. Her cart, an old grocery cart with one wheel that wobbled, was already half full from the past 2 hours. She had school in 3 hours. She had not slept well. None of that mattered when she stepped into that alley and saw him. He was slumped against the brick wall beside a dumpster, wearing what had once been a very expensive suit. She could tell, even then, because the fabric was different from anything she'd seen at Goodwill. It had a sheen to it. His tie was still knotted, loosely, crooked. His left hand was pressed to his side, and his face was a color that frightened her. Not pale, exactly, but wrong. Gray in a way faces shouldn't be. "Mister?" He didn't open his eyes. She looked back at the mouth of the alley. The street was empty. A pigeon moved on the sidewalk. A car passed without slowing. Dottie parked her cart against the wall and crouched down beside the man. Up close she could see that his shirt was dark and wet on the left side, soaked through. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck the way she'd seen in a video at school once, and felt something slow and faint, but there. "Okay," she said, mostly to herself. "Okay." She had lost it 2 months ago, and her grandmother hadn't been able to replace it yet. She ran to the end of the alley, flagged down the first person she saw, a woman walking a terrier, and said loudly and clearly, "There's a man in the alley and I think he's dying. Please call 911. The woman looked at her for 1 full second. Then she pulled out her phone. His name was Harrison Cole, and he was, by most accounts, one of the most powerful men in Delworth County. He had built Cole Logistics from a single rented warehouse into a regional shipping empire over 22 years. He had 3 assistants, a driver, a house with 7 bedrooms that he rattled around in alone. He had been married once, briefly, to a woman named Sylvia, and the divorce had been quiet and expensive, and neither of them had ever spoken badly of the other in public. He had no children. He had a reputation for being precise, demanding, and fair. 3 qualities his employees described in exit interviews with something close to reverence. What Harrison did not have on the morning Dottie found him was any memory of how he had ended up in that alley. The last thing he remembered clearly was leaving the Stanhope Hotel after a dinner meeting. He remembered the parking garage. He remembered his phone buzzing with a message from his assistant, Gerald, who still worked for him then, before the restructuring, and he remembered looking down at the screen for just a moment too long. After that, nothing until the lights of the ambulance. The doctors at St. Agatha's told him he had been stabbed once, cleanly, between 2 ribs. He had lost a significant amount of blood. Had he been found 30 minutes later, they said, things would have gone differently. His wallet and phone were gone. His watch, a gift from his father, one of the only things he still had from the man, was gone. But he was alive. The police came. He gave a statement. They asked if he knew who had done it, and he said he didn't, and that was the truth. They said they would investigate. He nodded and didn't expect much. What he kept thinking about in those first foggy days in the hospital was the girl. A nurse told him on the second morning that a child had been the one to flag down help. 11 years old, she said. She'd been collecting cans. Harrison lay there with tubes in his arm and machinery beeping softly beside him and thought about that for a long time. An 11-year-old collecting cans at 6 in the morning. He turned that fact over in his mind the way you turn a stone over in your palm, feeling its weight. He asked the nurse if she knew the child's name. The nurse didn't. He asked his assistant, a new one now, a composed young woman named Vera. To find out. He didn't explain why. Vera didn't ask. Dottie lived with her grandmother, Bess, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on Hollander Street. The elevator had been broken for 8 months. Bess's knees were bad, so Dottie carried the groceries up herself. The apartment was small but clean. Bess believed in clean. She also believed in God, in public education, in keeping your word, and in the power of a good meal to fix most things that weren't broken bones. She had raised Dottie since Dottie was 4. after Dottie's mother, Bess's daughter, had made a series of choices that left no room for a child in her life. Bess never said this cruelly. She simply said that Dottie's mother was going through something very hard, and that some people needed more time than others to find their way. Dottie had stopped waiting for her mother to find her way somewhere around age 9. The recycling money helped. It wasn't much, maybe $30, $40 a week, depending on the season, but it paid for the things Bess's fixed income didn't quite reach. A new pair of sneakers for school, the field trip fee in October, the small things that were somehow always the hardest. Dottie didn't talk about the man in the alley much after it happened. A police officer had come by the apartment to take her statement, and she had told them everything she knew, which wasn't much. She'd seen him, she'd gotten help, that was all. Bess had made the officer tea and sat beside Dottie the whole time, one hand resting on her granddaughter's arm. After the officer left, Bess said, "You did good, baby." Dottie said, "I hope he's okay." Bess said, "I believe he is." 3 weeks passed. Dottie went to school and collected cans and helped Bess with the laundry, and didn't think too much about the man in the gray going wrong face. She had a history test to study for. She had a leaking faucet to report to the landlord for the 4th time. Life moved forward the way it always did, not gently, exactly, but steadily. Then the car appeared. It was a Thursday afternoon, just after 4. Dottie was coming back from the recycling center, cart empty now, a small envelope of cash tucked into her jacket pocket. She turned onto Hollander Street and stopped. A black car was parked in front of her building. Not unusual, except that it was very clean and very quiet, and the man leaning against it was wearing a jacket that cost more than a month of her grandmother's rent. He was tall, maybe 60, with gray at his temples, and a posture that said he was used to people coming to him rather than the other way around. He straightened when he saw her. "Dottie?" She tightened her grip on the cart handle. "Who's asking?" Something moved across his face. It might have been a smile, a small one, surprised. "My name is Harrison Cole. I think you may have saved my life about 3 weeks ago." She studied him. He looked better than the last time she'd seen him, which was fair, since the last time she'd seen him he'd been the color of old dishwater. "You look different standing up," she said. He laughed, a short, real sound. "I imagine I do." Bess made tea again. This was what she did with visitors, regardless of who they were or what they drove. She put the kettle on and set out cups with matching saucers and arranged cookies on a plate. And she sat across from Harrison Cole in her living room with the same dignified calm she brought to every situation, and she listened. Harrison said he wanted to thank Dottie properly. He said he had people trying to find her for 2 weeks, and that Vera had finally tracked down her name through the police report. He said he understood if they didn't want anything from him, but that he'd like to do something if they'd allow it. Bess looked at him the way she looked at everyone, long and level, measuring the space between what a person said and what they meant. "Why?" she asked. "Because she didn't have to stop," Harrison said. "She could have kept walking. Most people would have." Bess was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dottie has always had a hard time walking past something that needed her." Dottie, sitting on the couch beside her grandmother with a cookie she hadn't eaten, said nothing. She was watching Harrison Cole the way she watched most new things, carefully, from a slight distance, deciding. "What is it you do?" she asked finally. "Shipping and logistics," he said. "I move things from one place to another." "That sounds boring." "Dottie," Bess said. "No," Harrison said. "She's right. It sounds boring. It isn't, but it sounds it." He came back. That was the thing Dottie hadn't expected. She had expected, if she was honest, that he would hand over some money or maybe a gift card, say thank you, and disappear back into whatever world produced cars like that and suits like that. That was usually how it went when the worlds touched briefly and then separated. But Harrison Cole came back. 2 Saturdays later he appeared again, this time with no car, on foot, carrying 2 bags from the diner on Morrison Avenue. He knocked on the door and said he'd been in the neighborhood and wondered if they'd eaten. Bess looked at him for a long moment and then stepped back to let him in. They ate at the kitchen table. Harrison ate a turkey club and drank coffee and talked to Bess about the neighborhood, about the building's broken elevator, about the history of Hollander Street, which he knew something about because his company had a distribution partner nearby 20 years ago. He asked Dottie about school. Not in the polite, brushing way adults usually asked. Not what grade are you in and do you like it, but specific questions. What subject did she like most? What was she reading? Did she have a good teacher this year or a hard one? Dottie told him about her science teacher, Mr. Abramson, who was hard and specific and expected a lot, and was the best teacher she'd ever had. She told him she was reading a book about a girl who sailed across the Pacific alone. She told him that history was interesting, but the textbook made it boring, and she didn't understand why they couldn't use better books. Harrison listened to all of this with the full weight of his attention, not the polite, impatient attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but real listening. Dottie noticed the difference. When he left that afternoon, he shook Bess's hand at the door. Then he turned to Dottie and said, "Same time in 2 weeks?" Dottie looked at her grandmother. Bess said, "I'll make something this time." There were things Harrison Cole did not say. In those early weeks, he did not say that he had lain awake in the hospital on the second night and understood very clearly that he had been surviving his life rather than living it. He did not say that 22 years of building something had left him sitting alone in a 7-bedroom house with no one to have dinner with. He did not say that when he asked his assistant to find the girl, it was because she was the first person in a very long time who had done something for him that he hadn't asked for, hadn't paid for, hadn't arranged. He didn't say any of that because it wasn't what the Saturdays were about. The Saturdays were about turkey clubs and coffee, and a girl telling him about books and bad textbooks, and a science teacher who expected too much and was great for it. He started bringing books. Not gifts, he told Dottie, just loans. Books he'd read that he thought she might like. A novel about a girl who became a codebreaker in the war. A non-fiction book about how ships worked, which he thought she'd find interesting given the collection business. A book about a boy who crossed the country alone during the Great Depression, which she read in 5 days and then looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "Did he make it?" she asked. "In real life?" "He did," Harrison said. She nodded slowly. "Good." The trouble came in the 10th week from a direction Harrison hadn't anticipated. His brother-in-law, the ex-wife's brother, a man named Godfrey, who had never particularly liked Harrison and made no secret of it, caught wind of the Saturday visits from someone who knew Vera. He called Harrison on a Wednesday evening and said, without warmth, "People are talking, Harry." Harrison said, "About what?" "About you driving to some apartment building on Hollander Street every 2 weeks." "About a kid." "I'm visiting a family," Harrison said. "Why?" Harrison told him briefly. "The alley, the ambulance, the 11-year-old with the grocery cart." There was a silence on the line. Then Godfrey said, "So give them a check and be done with it." Harrison said, "I don't think that's what this is." "What is it then?" Harrison thought about Dottie telling him the textbook made history boring. He thought about Bess setting out cookies on a plate with matching sauces for a man she'd never met. He said, "I'm not sure yet." Godfrey made a sound that conveyed his opinion clearly. "You know what this looks like, Harrison?" "Yes," Harrison said. "I imagine it looks unusual." He hung up. He sat in his kitchen for a long time with the lights off. Then he poured himself a glass of water and thought about the question, what was this? And he realized he didn't have a clean answer, and that the lack of one didn't bother him the way he'd expected. He told Dottie about the phone call, the following Saturday. He wasn't sure why. Some instinct about honesty, about not building something on a foundation of things left unsaid. He told her that some people had noticed the visits and had questions. Dottie was quiet for a moment. They were sitting on the fire escape because it was warm enough finally, the first real warmth of the year, and Bess was inside on the phone with her sister in Atlanta. "Are you going to stop coming?" Dottie asked. "No," Harrison said. "Then why does it matter what they think?" He looked at her. She was looking out at the street below, chin resting on her crossed arms on the railing, watching a kid on a bicycle try to pop a wheelie and fail repeatedly. "It doesn't," he said. "I wanted you to know, in case you heard something." She was quiet for another moment. Then, "My friend Kaya's mom asked if you were my dad." Harrison said nothing. "I said no," Dottie continued. "I said you were a friend of the family." She paused. "Is that right?" "That's right," Harrison said. She nodded, apparently satisfied. The summer moved. Harrison's case with the police produced one arrest and then stalled. He didn't follow it closely. His watch was gone and wasn't coming back, and he had made a kind of peace with that on the third night in the hospital, when making peace with things had felt very necessary and very urgent. Bess's knee required a procedure in July. It wasn't major, the doctor said, but the recovery would take 6 weeks and she would need to stay off it as much as possible. This presented a practical problem. Bess did almost everything, and the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator did not help. Harrison found out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, he had arranged, quietly and without fanfare, for a physical therapist to visit twice a week and for a grocery delivery service to cover the gap. He cleared it with Bess first, which was important to him. He asked her directly, explained what he had in mind, and said plainly, "You don't have to say yes." Bess studied him with that long measuring look. Then she said, "You keep showing up, Harrison." He said, "Is that a problem?" She said, "No, I'm just noting it." Dottie, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, met Harrison's eyes and gave him a very small nod. He understood this to mean, "She approves." He felt something loosen, somewhere in his chest, that he hadn't realized had been tight. It was Dottie who asked the question in late August, on a Saturday that was starting to have the first cool edge of early fall in it. They were walking, Bess well enough now to take short walks, the 3 of them moving slowly along the block at Bess's pace. "Harrison," Dottie said, "what happens in the winter?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "With the cart. When it's really cold, I can't go out as early." She said it matter-of-factly, not as a complaint, just as a thing that was true. "And the cans are worth less in the cold months. I don't know why, but they are." Harrison walked alongside her and thought about this. He thought about the broken elevator and the matching saucers and the safety pin holding the jacket zipper closed. He thought about what it cost to keep things running when the margins were narrow and the weather didn't help. He said, "I'd like to help with that, if you'll let me." Dottie said, "Bess always says you shouldn't take something unless you earned it." "I know," Harrison said. "She's told me." Dottie considered. "What if I helped you with something? Then it would be even." He thought about what he had, a company, a house with 7 bedrooms, 30 years of figuring out how to move things from one place to another. He thought about a girl who read 500-page books in 5 days and had opinions about textbooks. "I have a lot of files," he said slowly, "a lot of records that need to be organized. It's boring work." "I don't mind boring work," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm offering." Bess, who had been walking quietly beside them, said nothing. But she reached over and patted Harrison's arm once, briefly, the way you pat someone's arm when you don't have words and don't need them. It wasn't one moment. People always want there to be one moment, the scene where everything changes, where the music comes in, and the meaning is clear. It wasn't like that. It was a series of ordinary things that accumulated into something that had no name, Harrison knew, but that he understood now was the shape of his life, remade. It was Dottie sitting at the table in his office on a Saturday afternoon, methodically sorting a decade's worth of vendor contracts into folders she'd labeled in her careful, angular handwriting, occasionally asking questions that were embarrassingly sharp for an 11-year-old. It was Bess's chicken and rice in Tupperware containers that appeared every Saturday without Bess believed in feeding people. Because Bess believed in it was the walk back from the recycling center in October, Dottie swinging her empty cart and telling him about something Mr. Abramson had said about the difference between a hypothesis and a conclusion. It was the evening, a Tuesday, not a Saturday, he had called ahead, when the pipe under Bess's kitchen sink finally gave out completely and flooded the cabinet, and Harrison arrived 20 minutes after Dottie called him with a plumber friend and a mop and stayed till 10 o'clock, making sure the floor dried properly. He drove home that night on empty streets and sat in his driveway for a moment before going inside, and he thought, "I have somewhere to be." He had not thought that in a very long time. In November, Harrison sat down with his lawyer and began drawing up documents he had been thinking about for several weeks. He told no one what he was doing except Vera, who drew up the research he needed and said nothing, because that was also what she was good at. He came to Bess on a Sunday morning, not a Saturday, a Sunday deliberately, because this was different from the Saturdays, and he sat at her kitchen table with the documents in a folder and a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, and he told her what he wanted to do. He wanted to set up an education trust for Dottie, enough to cover school through college, with room for whatever came after. He wanted to make sure the apartment on Hollander Street was taken care of, the elevator, the faucet, the things that shouldn't require 4 calls to the landlord, and he wanted, if they were willing, to make it official. Not adoption. He had thought about that and concluded it wasn't right, wasn't what this was, wasn't what any of them needed, but a kind of guardianship, a legal recognition of what had already, quietly, become true, that he was in their lives and they were in his, and that this was not temporary. Bess listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was finished, she said, "What do you get?" he said. "What do you mean?" she said. "You're giving a great deal. I want to know what you think you're getting." Harrison was quiet for a moment. Outside, the street sounds of Sunday morning came through the window. A child somewhere, a car, the distant church bells from St. Agatha's, which he could now locate by sound because he had passed them enough times on the way to Hollander Street. "I get to come to the Saturdays," he said, "and Tuesdays when the pipe breaks." Bess looked at him for a long time, the longest look yet, the deepest measuring. Then she said, "I'll talk to Dottie." Dottie said yes. She said it simply and without ceremony, sitting on the fire escape even though it was November and cold enough to see their breath, because the fire escape was where they had their real conversations. She said, "If you're going to do this, you have to actually do it. You can't decide in 2 years it was too complicated and disappear." Harrison said, "I know." She said, "Bess is almost 70. She won't always be able to do everything," he said. "I know that too." She looked at him steadily. "Okay," she said. Then, after a pause, "You can't reorganize my book system." "I have a system, and it works," he said. "I wouldn't dream of it." Then she did smile, real and quick, the kind that came and went before she could stop it. They sat on the fire escape for another few minutes in the cold, watching the street. A woman walked a dog below. 2 kids argued over a bicycle. The light was going the way November light went, early, quickly, without apology. Dottie said, "You know what's weird?" "What?" "That you were in that alley." Harrison thought about that, about all the things that had to line up, his late night, her early morning, the particular Tuesday she walked that particular block. "Yeah," he said. "I almost didn't go down there," she said. "I heard the sound and I almost just kept walking." He looked at her. She shrugged, the oversized jacket riding up. The safety pin on the zipper had been replaced with a real zipper pull now, one that matched. He noticed these things. "I'm glad I didn't," she said. The church bells from St. Agatha's rang out across the rooftops, and the Sunday air carried them clearly. And Harrison Cole sat on a fire escape on Hollander Street in the cold and thought, "So am I."